folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. After yesterday's marathon session, I wasn't sure I'd be on today, but since my wife and child are off to Jakarta for a few days to take care of some stuff, I've got an opportunity, and a couple of really good ideas hit me this morning. So I'm going to have to choose one of them. And that's always hard when you have two things you want to talk about and you have to focus on one. But I've decided that I am going to title this talk Cult Marxism 101. How to destroy literally any prevailing cult system, replacing it with a new one. Okay, so let's start with some definitions like I like to do. What is a cult? Now, most people would immediately say a cult is like a false belief system, a false religion, a false worship that is so crazy that its practitioners are considered kind of crazy, right? Fringe. But in fact, all religions began as cults and settled into a version of it that became so popular that it became accepted as truth. Okay, so what is a cult? It's a belief system, it's a worldview that is not greatly accepted by the rest of the world. In fact, is viewed maybe with suspicion or with even hate as, challenging their mainstream view of the world, and thus being a danger. And so cults are often thought of as things we need to be afraid of. We need to stamp out. We need to call the Inquisition, if you will. And that's certainly in mainstream culture how cults are viewed. And as mainstream culture shifts, what is or isn't a cult shifts as well. So, we went from a time when the mainstream was, at least in the US and Europe, for instance, mainstream was the Judeo-Christian ethos, worldview. Maybe a modified version of it, not the original Catholic version, but sort of the sanitized, modernized version that existed, for instance, in the U.S. when I was a child. And a cult was considered, a strange bunch of Christians that were so far out from the standard Christian, Jewish, shared view of let's get along and stop fighting these religious battles version, which is kind of where things sat when I was a child, and or something that was very far off the edge, like the new religions that were coming into popularity at the time, coming from the East, or modified versions of what was coming from the East. Back in the 60s, if you lived in that era, you know that there was a huge inrush of influence from Eastern philosophical religion, sort of a neo-Buddhist, what would we call it, Renaissance, taking, the nice things out of Buddhism, the nice, comfortable, happy stuff out of Buddhism, and turning it into a love, light, oneness cult. And yes, it was a cult, and it remains a cult. All religions are cults. It's just that we don't call them cults if we think we've got the upper hand. Oh, well, this is just truth. This is the only possibility, because anything else is crazy, right? This is how you start thinking when your cult gains ascendancy. And this is what ties this idea to Marxism. Okay, if you don't know much about Marxism, how Marx and Engels thought, what they proposed was basically applying what had been done through cults more scientifically to be able to sell pretty much anything, including an economic view of the world that was designed to basically tear apart what currently existed as the mainstream in the late 18th century, so that they could build something new, which was their idea of perfection, their cult. So the basis of the Marxist cult its original formulation was that the world was made up of two groups of people: the proletariat, who were the hard-working people who did all the real work in the world, and they built the stuff in the factories, they grew the crops, they did all the stuff that was absolutely necessary to life on this planet. And there was the bourgeoisie, who were the ones that took advantage of their work, the work of the proletariat, and used them and abused them and controlled them and manipulated them, and got all the profit while giving just a pittance to the people that did the real work. This is the premise of Marxism. Okay, it's a very dualistic view of the worldview, if you will, that is basically centered around this definition of what the oppressed and what the oppressor was. And it's a very plastic definition because, to some extent, if we're successful in any measure of the word, we're bourgeoisie. Doesn't matter if it's earned or if you're worthy of it. It's if you are able to exert enough power to control others and hire and fire and set the wages of others, you are automatically part of this bourgeoisie. And similarly, if this is the falsehood. Underlying the whole Marxist premise is that when you succeed, if you have your communist revolution, all of a sudden there's all this temptation of the people who now have the power, which is the leaders of the Communist Party, to become the new bourgeoisie because they have the power and they can control and manipulate and use other people's. And this is exactly what has happened every time anybody has tried to institute the communist dream of Marx and Engels, to the point where any sane person knows that it's a complete fantasy. It does not work. It will never work. Anybody telling you that communism just hasn't been done right, frankly, is just an idiot. I'm sorry, you got a really bad religion there. You've got a really bad cult. It's based upon some premises that have been proven time and time again to be a bunch of junk. It's not consistent with human nature. Okay, now capitalism is also a cult. It just has a different set of premises. And here's where I need to kind of talk about, why do I talk about cult Marxism instead of cultural Marxism? What's the difference between cult and culture? They share the same base word, don't they? Cult, culture. That's because they are very related. Okay, a culture is essentially a shared worldview among some community of people. This is what culture is. It shifts, it changes, it evolves. It's a necessary prerequisite for human life. Think about it. If we were born and grew up on a desert isle with no one else around, we would develop a culture of one. If we had one other person on that island, we would develop a culture of two. And the nature of those two people, their sexes, their ages, their particular previous worldview that they came to this little culture with would have a lot of effect on the culture that would result. So culture is a shifting, evolving thing. A cult is basically something that flies in the face of that shifting normal mode. And so the difference between cultural Marxism is basically creating a false or real oppressor-oppressed class and making that the focus of cultural change to try to undo the oppression. When it becomes a cult, the difference between cultural Marxism and cult Marxism is carrying that to a religious level, where this is my dogma, this is the way I view the world, I won't change it for anything. It doesn't matter how much evidence there is. It doesn't matter if you show me under the skirt of my God, I'm not going to believe they have a penis. And this is where cults come from. The Marxist feminist cult, and it is a cult, is one that carries feminism to ridiculous lengths, which are now becoming very obvious as this cult has gained so much power that everybody wants to be a woman. And we've got all these sex fluid things going on with little children being encouraged to identify early on. And, you know, you've got little girls who think that they're going to somehow have more power or have more of what they want if they're boys, and little boys thinking they're going to get what they want if they're girls. And, you know, this is very delusional, and I think people are realizing that, and it's causing a lot of mental illness, a lot of angst in our society that doesn't need to be there. Okay, so as such, cult Marxism has existed long before Marx sort of made a scientific stab at how to use all this politically. And that's all Marxism is about, is creating an economic worldview. Everybody says, well, no, it's not political, it's just economic. This is bullshit. Communism is a political psyop, positing an economic system that's supposed to be the better alternative to capitalism. And this fight between socialism and capitalism is those are two other poles of some cult Marxism. And, you know, some of the most radical poles are those worshipers of capitalism, my capitalism, right or wrong, and the worshipers of socialism. Socialism is the only way to do things. If it's not socialist, it doesn't work. And there are people that think like that. There are rational people who have seen the cultural effects of both, and they haven't become Marxist about it. They've become rational and reasonable about it. They aren't getting extreme. They will admit that, you know, capitalism has holes. As a way of doing things, it pretty much describes the only way that we conspire to do bigger things than we can do by ourselves, by convincing other people to chip in and participate in what we're doing, and trying to figure out how to divide the labor and the benefits equitably. And, you know, the leader tends to have more power. And when the leader has more power, they usually get more of the benefits. And you could argue that is their due, because they had to take more of the risk. They had to take more of the responsibility. And that's a pretty good argument. You can make a pretty good case for that. You can also make a case for the fact that, well, if the leader isn't valuing all the other people doing all the dirty work that add up to making this organization successful, then they're a bad leader. That doesn't mean that the system is wrong. It means the leadership is wrong. However, if you think you're just going to change leadership and things are going to change when you've got a system that rewards leaders with power that they may not have to be accountable for, that they can misuse, all you're going to do is install a new leader that's going to talk up a big storm, whatever they need to do to get into power, and then start exhibiting the same behaviors as the old leader, because they can. Okay, so capitalism by itself is not something you should be worshiping. No more than communism, no more than socialism. If you worship something like that religiously and make it the centerpiece of your worldview, you are a cult Marxist, whether you're a capitalist or a socialist or a communist. Whether you're a feminist or a masculinist, if you think one sex is superior, that one sex should be in charge, that one sex does a better job of managing things no matter what is being managed, you're a Marxist. If you think that there aren't differences between the two sexes that reflect in certain things that they can do better or worse, then you're sort of a sexless Marxist, okay? You think the sexes are totally equal? That's a fallacy. They are born different. They will always be different. No matter how much surgery they get, no matter how many hormones you give them, they are biologically different. If you disagree with that premise, you are by definition a cult Marxist. You get where I'm coming from here? Now, same thing goes with race. If you think one race is better than another, a priori, and deserves to be preeminent, you are a cult Marxist of race. You're a race Marxist. And yes, there are poles of race Marxism. There are folks like Putin that think that Russia has a manifest destiny because the Slav people are superior. We've demonstrated it in so many ways. Look at all the great composers. Look at all the great thinkers that were Slavic. And they have a good argument there. There is a lot to be found in Russian culture, Russian history, that is admirable. But if you make that your religion and you become blind to the accomplishments of the rest of the world, you are a cult Marxist of that particular specialty. The East-West divide of, you got some people that think the Eastern way is the only way. It's the West that is screwing up everything. You are a cult Marxist. Same as if you were on the other side and say, well, the West had all the good ideas and the East just copies things. Cult Marxist. You understand the definition now? It is pervasive. And it is feeding a larger system, because if you look around you, this era, I did a recent one on the age of critical everything. And this is where this idea of cult Marxism sort of germinated, and now I'm going to really go in more depth. What we're in right now is a time where everyone is being encouraged to become more and more of a cult Marxist, to the point that we each have our own bubble of belief that if anybody challenges it, we go ballistic. And this is what you see in many people's online behavior. Oh, they're all nice, until somebody challenges them, especially in what they think is their own personal echo chamber that's supposed to believe everything they believe and everything they think. And that was working really well until the pandemic hit, didn't it? And all of these echo chambers started falling apart when some people bought the pandemic narratives and other people questioned it. And depending on which political force was in power, which political cult you belonged in, you swallowed one or the other pill and went down that lane and made your decisions based upon that cult worldview, and are now hopefully in the process of realizing that you may not have been in the right cult during the last 2 years, that you may have been played, you may have been turned into a cult member without your knowing about it. And this is what propaganda is all about, because ever since folks realized that you could be really successful with this cult Marxism shit, and I'm not talking about the successes of the USSR and the Chinese Communist Party, I'm talking about the successes of Hollywood and Madison Avenue, because that's exactly what's going on in the commercial world. Branding and brand advertisement is a cult. It's a very small cult and an exclusive cult. And you know, if you're cultish about your bag, I'll only wear a Hermes bag because it just fits my style the best. Okay, that's a fairly safe cult if you've got the money to buy Hermes, right? Or you have a good contact to get the rip-off ones at 1/10 of the price, which most of the smart people in Asia do. So, you know, it's not all bad, but it is all manipulative, controlling. And to the extent that we fall into a cult of someone else's making, we are sharing in the karma of them making it. And as I've told you many times, the cardinal karmic sin, in fact, the only karmic sin that leads back to everything else, is tyranny, using, manipulating, controlling other people, other souls, without their knowledge, without them understanding that they're being controlled and used and manipulated. And this is something that you are able to do to others if you are at a higher level of consciousness than them. And this is why I tell you that spiritual advancement is not all good. You can advance to be an evil God. And many of our spiritual leaders are on the path towards becoming evil gods, or are already the servants of evil gods. And yes, evil does exist. Evil is basically becoming so set in your cult worship that it becomes more important than anything else. It becomes more important than truth, honesty, good behavior. You'll lie, cheat, steal, deceive, do anything to promote your cult. Now, this is the dark side of cults. And this is one of the reasons why I do not believe that even if you accuse me of trying to start a cult through my teaching, I think you are dead wrong, because I do not take a cult approach to this. Yes, I do warn people about where their cult behavior, where their cult mindset may be taking them. But it's a warning. about what path they're going to be leading themselves to through that. You don't have to feel guilty about warning somebody about a puddle they're about to step into, do you? Where the problem might come in is if you get in the way and pull them away from the puddle and tackle them and say, no, 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 you can't go through that puddle, you'll get wet. Well, maybe they were running through the puddle because they knew that that was the shortest way to their destination. And who are we to say it's not? Who am I to say it's not? And the other thing that I teach is that everybody has their own destination in the multiverse. We're all individuals. Every soul is unique. We are not all one. Now you can make yourself, you can believe in a cult of one. And believe that with your whole soul. We are all one. And if we just all unite and work together, everything will be perfect. Okay. That can be a useful cult. It's a very delusional cult because I have to ask you, has it ever succeeded? Has any unity movement stayed unified? Has any cult of one ever achieved oneness, real oneness? No. Everyone that has tried has ended up having to use violent means to try to exterminate the ones that didn't want to be part of their one, correct? This is how the Crusades started. This is how Islam got started because, some folks in the Arab world didn't want to be part of the one of Christianity, which wasn't even one anymore, it was two, because they couldn't agree on whose patriarch ought to be the one at the top of the church. And so you got two flavors of Christianity, that one that said, no, Rome is all roads lead to Rome. Rome is the center of the universe of Christianity. And another group, the Orthodox group, said, well, okay, let's just take the opposite position of every city gets to have its own patriarch if it's big enough. And the patriarchs will jostle with each other over their territory, and we'll let them fight it out amongst themselves, but nobody is allowed to be the primate. Except that sort of the patriarch of Constantinople usually ended up being the big cheese, especially after Islam took over Alexandria, which was another center of religious and cultural thought, if you will. Antioch, too, was another place that had its own patriarch that was pretty influential until Antioch became less important. Okay, so this is what cult Marxism is. Now that you're able to recognize it, you understand what it is, I would challenge you to think about in what ways is my worldview based on a cult Marxism. Am I a capitalist worshiper? Am I a communist worshiper, socialist worshiper? Believes that that's the only thing it takes to make government perfect? Am I a worshiper of the United States, or of China, or of Russia, or of one particular nation being perfect? Am I a worshiper of the United Nations being perfect? Am I a worshiper of the World Economic Forum's enlightened ability to make perfection? Am I a worshiper of this neo-tribalist cult, which is definitely a cult, the survivalist cult that says, oh, things are so bad that everything is absolutely going to collapse from here, and we're going to be bombed back to the Stone Age or disastered back to the Stone Age, and so I need to be a prepper. And boy, they have a really good cult going. I mean, they support each other, they love each other, and they're off in their own world. And that's fine for now, but that, I tell you what, that cult is going to get pretty violent if they ever get to that point, because then those folks that were, well, we're preppers here in Canada, we're Canadian preppers, and you've got preppers in the U.S., and they love each other now. What if they're competing for the last resources, the last supply of gunpowder, if you will? They're going to be fighting each other, and it's going to be a cult war. And cult wars are religious. Even it's among members that used to belong to the same cult. That's actually when we get the most violent, is when we think that our own people are turning against us. Think about it. That's happened so many times in history. Civil wars, revolutions, are much more violent than wars. Much, much more violent. And the worst wars ever were the ones that were fought over cult justifications. Wars against the Aryan supremacy cult, the coming war against the Han supremacy cult, the wars of the Reformation between the Catholics and all of the different new cults of Protestantism. And yes, they were considered cults at the time. Little known fact, I don't guess that many Baptists or Lutherans or Presbyterians or Methodists realize that they are cult members. But in fact, they are. In fact, Christianity has splintered into a whole bunch of cults, even cults within cults. And this is why you have some Catholics who are very traditionalist, very conservative, and you've got other Catholics that are so woke, you wonder why they even bother calling themselves Catholic anymore. I think the Pope falls in that category. He's so bought into this idea that, well, peace at any price, I'm going to change my religion to whatever it needs to be able to get everybody loving each other. And basically you've got the leaders of many religions forming their new cult, this new cult of oneness that is able to ignore any truth that came before in the name of peace and love and harmony. That's a cult, my friends. And it's a dangerous cult. Because like pure Marxism, it is completely flexible till its boundaries are challenged. Look around at the love, light, and oneness tribes. They say that they're all one, they're all getting together and praying together and doing everything together, but this area of overlap, of togetherness, of oneness is so limited that it does not stand up to the slightest scrutiny. And this is what is essentially behind the woke cult too. The woke cult is sort of the materialist manifestation of what is this oneness spiritual cult. And it doesn't hold up to any scrutiny. And this is what you're seeing in the political world now, is that the cultists are saying, well, okay, we're all one. Everybody agrees with me. I'm going to go push my personal agenda because I'm trans, because I want to identify as whatever I want, because my body is my temple and I don't care if there's a baby inside it. That's mine as long as it's in my body. And when they cut it out of me, I get to decide what knife they use and how deep they stick it. This is a cult. And this is the splintering that's happening with this cult we see all around us now. The globalist cult is related to this idea that, oh, if we could only have one world government, that would make all the decisions, would handle every problem as one, as a team. Yes, 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 I can channel Greta Thunberg. This is cult mentality. And it's not healthy. The bigger a cult gets, the more dangerous it becomes to itself. Because cults are inherently power hungry. They desire followers. They need followers. They need likes, shares, and subscribes to exist. That gives them the encouragement they need to prove that their cult is valid, because they don't have any sound, rational basis. They are all based upon premises which are flawed, which anyone who sat back and thought about what they are saying would say, this is nonsense. It does not fit the evidence around you. So, let me talk about another cult that many of you may be part of and not aware of. How many of you would agree with the statement, we are all born equal? Most of you, I think, would say, oh yeah, of course. Well, that's the way it should be anyway. Right? But in fact, that's not true. We aren't all born equal. It never will be true. We are all born as individuals. And I can tell you why, because we all are born many times. Some of us are born for the first time in a human vehicle, and we may have very little experience in the human form. And that will have a certain effect on our future. No matter what our DNA looks like, the genetic makeup of our soul vehicle, no matter what our upbringing is, we are going to have a different path because we have different experience coming into life. We're not all equal in any way, shape, form, or way of viewing it. Period. To assert that is nonsense. It's cult mentality. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all have equal opportunity. Get the difference? Just because we're not born equal doesn't mean we should take away chances from people who we think don't deserve those chances. This is the horrible flaw that the Hindu cults got into with their caste system, with this insane idea of, oh, well, the Panchen Lama gets to go find the next Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama gets to find the next Panchen Lama, and this is how we keep this cult juggling in the air. And we can hide our elitism behind this mythology of some special person being able to identify the incarnation of some other special person. This is a cult. It is not truth. It is a cult. It has absolutely no rational basis for it. And I would defy anyone to argue otherwise. Prove it. Cult, cult, cult. And that's the other thing that sort of defines a cult, is you have to be hanging on assumptions that are false, that you're not willing to let go of. And this is why this is coming ahead right now, because science is advancing so quickly that things that are known, the background conditions that are true, are so great that many old cults are falling by the wayside, or they have to change their fundamental premises. And any cult that denies reincarnation, that denies the existence of the soul, is already being challenged. And they're being just as dogmatic about it. The materialist scientist will argue up and down that we don't have a soul, that reincarnation doesn't exist, and they will ignore the studies that have been done that prove, without a question, that it is real. They will ignore all of the experience that people have had that confirms it and say they're just, it's a bit of undigested beef. They're just imagining these things because the brain is able to imagine anything, and the neurons can make anything happen, and we can create any fantasy we want. Just no, we not know any fantasy that who wants? Who's driving this thing? Who's creating our dreams? They never quite get to answering that. They hand wave around and get you so bored with their discussion that they never get to the point of saying, well, okay, where, if everything spiritual is just our imagination, where did our imagination come from? Who inspires that? You can't make this shit up. I'm sorry, you idiots. And you certainly can't make up things that are so common between different groups of people. Common themes, but different manifestations, because this is how religion happens. You take the truth and you put it through the prism of your current culture, and you come out with a partial truth, with a cult that sort of explains what's going on, sort of explains what this crazy guy, Jesus was talking about, or Muhammad, or I don't know, Krishna, whoever is your cult figure, your cult teacher, your cult leader, Buddha, and you try to make some sense of it through your current culture. You take truth and run it through culture, and it becomes a cult. Because you can't quite explain it, because you don't quite have all the knowledge, all the words even to describe it. I mean, nobody even invented the concept of a multiverse, as far as I know, till within the last 100 years. We thought everything we saw around us was, quote, reality. This is all there is. What I see is what I get. And now we're finding out more and more that what we see isn't necessarily all that's there. Not all we get. In fact, in altered states of consciousness, we can see and get a lot more. And some of it's really weird, and some of it is, oh, that makes sense to me. But you'll go tell it to somebody else, and they'll think you're fucking crazy. Which I'm kind of getting my two topics mixed up, but maybe that's a good thing. At any rate, I think you really need to think about your cult. And that does not mean that your cult is wrong. And, if you actually can justify it, if you're not denying data that you cannot deny, 1 + 1 = 2, in pretty much every universe I've been to, you can say it equals 4 and create a new math if you want to, but I defy you to find many members of your cult that want to join that fantasy. And this is the difference, essentially, between our personal cult, our personal fantasies, and a shared cult, a shared culture, a shared truth. We all want to get at the truth, but it's hard to get there. You'd have to have a wide background to really grasp the truth out of all of the cults and cultural prisms that we run things through. And I like this word prism because it sounds like prison, and that's essentially what it is. What being on the other side of the prism is. You're seeing things only with one point of view. You see blue, but actually if you run the light through the prism, you see that, oh, this light is actually a combination of shades, and this kind of blue is made up of these small components, a large component maybe of blue and components of other things. And in fact, this is where spectrographic analysis comes from, a very important field of physics. You can actually determine from the spectrographic content of the electromagnetic emissions of a material when bombarded with particles, what its resonances are, and those give away what its composition is. This is how the Merkaba works, the spiritual signature of our true self, which scientists are not accepting that there is. Yet they don't have any way to explain attraction, romantic attraction. Why some people are incredibly interested in physics and others are incredibly interested in art, and others are just interested in making some money and having a good time. They can't explain that. I can. Better, I think, than any cult or religion that ever hit you before. If that's what you want to understand. It's maybe not a comfortable knowledge, what I'm giving you in my podcast. It's not an easy solution. It's not, well, it's all an illusion, so you can do anything you want, which is a very popular pole of Neo-Buddhism. Or it's all love, light, and oneness. Anything that isn't love is just something we don't understand. Give me a fucking break. There is evil. And evil will be magnified if you encourage it. Loving evil is stupid. Just as stupid as biting the hand that feeds you is kissing the hand that slaps you. That is stupid. If you kiss the hand that slaps you, they're going to want to slap you again. Hey, I got away with it. What can I do now? Maybe I'll poke him in the eye. This is Three Stooges stupid. And yet you've got large numbers of people, especially online, touting this unconditional love. We just need to give more love. We need to be kinder. And everything will be perfect. You're fucking stupid. Three Stooges stupid. I'm sorry. I don't know how to put it any nicer. Because you can't keep doing this. You are enabling, encouraging all the evil. It is because of you folks we haven't stood up to the Communist Party in China. It is because of you people that we haven't stood up to Wall Street megalomaniacs. It's because of you folks that we haven't questioned what's going on with these World Economic Forum morons. I mean, these people are crazy. Have you looked at some of the stuff that they've been discussing in their meetings openly? And we're supposed to love them and trust them because, well, they're so smart. They're such deep people in their field that they must know more than we do. Everything's going to be perfect. Wake up. Anyway, I didn't know I was going to get as vociferous in this session as I did, but I really want to knock some sense into any heads I can because you don't have much longer going down this path. Cult Marxism is going to get you reincarnating in a universe run by gods that create cults who want worship. who want blind worship, my way or no way. And this is essentially the Borg element of a cult, of a god, a goddess. The more they want, they demand blind adherence to their religion, their cult, the more Borg-like they are. They want to be a hive mind. They want to assimilate you. They will only accept you if you will believe anything they tell you to believe. And even if you have no interest in spirituality, you don't, you're a hardcore atheist cultist, you're damn well afraid of what cults would do to you. And you think, we just need to kill religion. Bullshit! Atheism is a religion. Everything is a cult when it becomes dogmatic. When it refuses to accept any proof that falls outside of your accepted truth. Atheism is a cult. Repeat after me. Atheism is a cult. Marxism is a cult. Scientism is a cult. Just trust the science is a cult. That's not what science is about. If you think that's what a science is about, you've turned it into a religion. If you think, I don't know anything, I'm just going to let Jesus run my life, that is a cult. That's basically saying, whatever I do, Jesus made me do it, right? That's dangerous. Now, if you live a pretty easy life, in the middle of nowhere, and you have neighbors you live with forever, maybe that cult will be just fine for you. But in the world that might be coming, a world of limited resources and collapsing systems, that cult is going to be challenged. You'll find ways to rationalize killing the non-believers. Jesus made me. Jesus told me to do this. Jesus want me to survive, so I can bring the good news of Christianity to the survivors. I'm sorry, that's just as dark a place to be as somebody that's holding on to the secrets of making the nuclear bomb so that they can pass it on to the survivors. This is what cults do eventually. If they don't adapt to new information, if they aren't willing to accept the truth that they had embraced, may not be the full truth, and expand it to fill new information, they are cultists. Now, I've been a member of many religions. I was born into the Protestant church, the Presbyterian church. Forced to go to Sunday school, forced to go to church services, forced to go to church camp, and I hated that cult. I absolutely did. When I was a child, I used to hide my Sunday shoes or some Sunday clothes, hoping that I would be exempted from going. I hated it that much. I used to fake illness because I didn't want to go to church. I think most of us have done that if we don't like being raised in a cult, and I thought it was a cult. Nobody seemed to really believe anything that was there, and the only time anybody really was happy at church was at the social hour that happened after, where they served up watered down coffee and tea, and maybe if you're lucky, some little cookies or something that somebody brought. And the kids ran around in the gym having a good time, and like, wow, that's the best thing about church as far as I know. The potlucks were fun sometimes when people brought good stuff and it didn't all get eaten too quickly. But yeah, I didn't much like that cult. And it encouraged me to kind of move down the atheist path for a while. And there were times in my life where I called myself an atheist or an agnostic. There were times that, I said, gosh, I love a lot of the art and the emotional nature of Catholicism, because my mother was born a Catholic. She was raised in southern France as a very devout Catholic and had to convert to Protestantism so she could marry my father and they could go to the same church. So I had a very deep exposure to Catholicism, especially through my love of classical music and classical art. Later on in life, I became exposed to other religions, other ways of thinking. My first wife, when I met her, was a Buddhist. Now she's a very staunch Christian, but at the time she was a Buddhist, and I thought, well, that's weird. And because of that, I learned a little bit more than I knew before about that particular religion. I never actually called myself a Buddhist. I never was that attracted to it. And I still am not attracted to it because I don't like much of what it stands for, especially in its neo-Buddhist incarnation as a cult. What I'm trying to tell you is that you're not talking to somebody here who hasn't changed their mind, who hasn't been in cults and gotten out of them. I've never been in a cult that was super dangerous, a suicide cult or a Jim Jones kind of a thing or whatever. Scientology, I don't know. That's an interesting cult that I've never wanted to learn too much about after I kind of scratched the surface of it. But there are many cults out there. And you're welcome to join them. As I always say, it's up to you. That may be just perfect for your path. But do it with your eyes wide open, not eyes wide shut. Because cults inherently are flawed. If a cult is not willing to accept anything outside their accepted, received dogma, by definition, that is a flawed system of belief. Belief needs to be flexible. It needs to evolve as it discovers new information. It doesn't have to be thrown out, which is kind of the Marxist idea of doing things. Okay, the world belief system right now is horrible, so we need to kill everything. We need to kill all religion. We need to kill all capitalists. This is the essence of communism. And this is what has made it such a horrible force. And is still a horrible force. Look at what's really going on in China. They are literally killing people who will not go along with that cult. And that cult is becoming more extreme now that it's focused in the living person of Xi Jinping instead of the expired and semi-discredited ex-leader Mao. It's a dangerous cult that they've got going in China. Much more dangerous than the Russian cult, which Putin leads, because Putin is laughable as a messiah of Russia. An ex-KGB agent with all of the dirt that we know about him, the Russian people just laugh at him. They're not going there, and that's why his war is failing. But there's a lot more folks still following the Xi cult. And it is dangerous, and it will lead us into World War III. Just watch. The Ayatollah cult is another one that is not so strong because there's not an Ayatollah that has this Messiah flavor of him. And God help us if the Muslims ever come up with a Messiah that is the conquering Messiah that they think that they want. I know that's not going to happen. In fact, the real Messiah of Islam, the Mahdi, is going to be the opposite of what the Muslims expect, and probably will be persecuted and attacked by Muslims, as they've attacked pretty much every prophet that's been given to them since Muhammad. This is the nasty behavior of cults, and Islam has become a cult. It was not always that way. In its early years, Islam was flexible enough to accept and to adapt and to integrate. And this is how Islam flourished. This is why it spread, not just because of armies. It was ideas that were spreading. Anybody can win a war if they have enough soldiers. You cannot win wars consistently. You cannot conquer places and keep them without ideas, without a culture that works, without a cult that works. If that cult becomes too rigid, it won't work anymore. It will become destructive. It will turn in on itself, start attacking itself and attacking others as it's challenged. This is the nature of the beast. And this is why, we need to really understand what this thing is all about. This beast of cult Marxism that we've almost turned into a science now, in which the movers and shakers of the world are using to separate us, to divide us, to militarize us against each other in order to hide what the really evil people are doing behind closed doors in private meetings, secret organizations, etc. That's what's going on here. They understand cult Marxism, and they are using it to build smoke screens that keep people occupied, keep them fighting each other, keep them in a sea of confusion, while behind the scenes the strings are being pulled. And what happens in that situation is exactly what's happened in the lead up to every other world war we ever had. And actually, this isn't World War III we're in right now. There have been many, many world wars before that, even in human memory. The Napoleonic War era was a world war. You could maybe term that the real World War I, but in fact, the wars of the Reformation were essentially another world war. It just only involved the Christian world. But that was a large part of the world at the time, and part of the world that was the most dynamic, that was changing the most. And this is why we had the age of exploration, the age of white supremacist colonization, as they call it. It's because the wars of the Reformation led to an era of Christian thought becoming more outward looking, more open to new ideas. Before the Reformation of the Christian Church, people were crucified. People were put to death for having ideas that the church didn't like. That's what happened to folks like Copernicus. Maybe not Copernicus himself, but many of the scholars and scientists who tended to be priests, oddly enough, because those were the ones that got the best education, priests and nobility under the old world order. They started questioning and exploring thinking outside of the cult. And they were attacked for it. And battles were fought for that. And gradually their ideas became more pervasive, to the point where you either had to accept them or you had to accept a wider definition of Christianity that allowed for the fact that there were many different subcults. And you could all get along together and just join the one that you were happy with. And to a large extent, that is the idea that's the precursor for the idea I'm trying to share. What I am talking about is a reformation of all religions, all cults, all groups of thinking, all cultures, not homogenizing them into one dumbed down, unified pop culture, but a big tent where we say, okay, it's okay to have this. It's okay to like classical music. It doesn't make you a stuffed up bigot that, is elitist. In fact, there are people just as elitist now about pop music, aren't there? We don't need these memes to put other people down so that we can feel lifted up ourselves. This is cult behavior. If you have to deflate others to inflate yourself, you are a cult member. And whatever memes you use to do that, to make yourself feel good, should be a good indication, a good way to see what cult do I belong in and how can I get out of that cult. Well, my wife is calling me frantically, so something's going on here. Needs my attention. Anyway, this is a good place to wrap it up. Like, share, subscribe. Tune in again to the Omnist Hour. Thanks for coming. Happy Karma.